And boom. All right. Welcome back to the No Lifejackets podcast. We've all aged 30 years since the last episode that land is a frozen tundra outside, post-apocalyptic, but we're broadcasting still.
The day after tomorrow, you know?
Yeah. We're back here. We got our buddy Tim here, as per the usual, for our book review type episodes. On this one, we were taking a look at The Suitcase by Sergei Dovlatov, and this is a pretty gosh darn good one. I was a big fan, but for some overall context, it's really short, which is nice, typical of our of the stuff we review here. We have short attention spans, so we keep them nice and short. This one is
TikTok
written
generation, you know. It's
exactly. Let me tell you, over 6 seconds, I lose it. But the book is written by kind of he became an expat from the Soviet Union, emigrated out, was kind of generally pushed out like a lot of creatives were at the time. Interesting guy, did a lot of different things in his life, a very wide smattering of jobs, from being a prison guard when he was drafted into the military to working at various like propagandist type newspapers, sort of. And rolling back through. So the book, in general structure, it's like a series of short stories, all relating to an item that he brought in his suitcase from the USSR over to America when he came. So it's a really cool way that he kind of introduces the setup with all of the items, and then as you kind of deep dive into each one, it's like, oh well, because they start off and they're just dusty items. But by the end, you know the meanings behind every single one. So I'll toss it over to you, Tim, if you wanna add a little more context here.
Yeah, just to be clear, Mr. Dovlatov, he emigrated from the USSR to the United States, and he died in New York in 1990 of heart failure, finally, and in the beautiful age of 48 years old. Given his lifestyle, that's pretty appropriate. But yeah, Mr. Dovlatov is an interesting sort of misanthropic figure who got pushed out, as you said, as a lot of the creative minds were. And although he wasn't particularly politically in this book, at least, I think. And what struck me as a great theme that sort of went across this book is that these stories looked like they were just sort of like, the book might as well be called Stories from the Soviet Union or something like that. You know, it was like these autobiographical stories pertaining to these items he brought with himself in the suitcase, hence the name of the book. Yeah, it was just a very interesting way of structuring the book, I think. So yeah.
Nice. Awesome. All right. So let's jump into some of our thoughts. And like you said, the stories I found were less about he's not really a character in this kind of autobiographical work, right? He's never like the focus of the stories. It always seemed to me that the focus of the story was always on someone, on another character, or kind of the environment that he was in general at the time.
Yes.
And so it's a very, very focused on anything but himself. There's very little introspection, I would say, at least in a typical you'd expect in sort of in these sorts of stories. It's a lot of just outward focused stuff. And so I was curious on some of this. I tried looking up a huge chunk of the stories. It's kind of satirical, so I'm sure it might be exaggerated a little bit, but a lot of the stories he's hanging out with a lot of drunks and criminals and old people like this. but the drinking is very heavy in the book and in Sergei's life. Um, he references himself as a heavy alcoholic multiple times. And I was trying to find like a chart. I didn't find a really good chart for like alcoholism in the Soviet Union. But if you look up alcoholism in the Soviet Union, it's like there'll be a binge drinking was commonly started at like 14, 15 years old, carried through to adulthood. The prevalence of heavy drinking for among women was 52% at one point, and among men, I believe, was over 80%. So, um, do you have any context or idea of like it like do you have any experience with, with this sort of culture or anything like that? You're a lot closer
Yeah,
to them over there.
yeah, that's right. It's very heavy in the book. That's true. That's one of the things I've noticed as well. And he says in the book that he's always been used to hanging out with criminals and these sort of uh, bottom of the barrel types of people, um, instead of the good looking, the famous, the wealthy. He was always drawn to. He says that very explicitly. He was always drawn to people who were um, the bottom of the social ladder, let's say, and artists included in that category. And in terms of the drinking, well, there's no drinking like the Soviet drinking, right? And there's drinking in Eastern Europe, or Central and Eastern Europe for sure as well. But even in the times when uh, Eastern Europe was still beyond the Iron Curtain, even in those times, it weren't. I don't think it was as pervasive in one's life as in Mr. Dovlatov's case, or in the case of his compatriots in the
Mhm.
Soviet Union. There was this one funny example from the book where he's talking to his editor, and his editor says, or he asks him, "Do you have something to drink, Sergey?" And the editor says, "Me? Come on, I never drink, not before 1 p.m."
Yeah.
That's kind of funny. you know? That was kind of funny. It's just, to me, this sort of drinking was part of a larger picture, and reading this book felt like reading something from a whole another world. It didn't feel familiar to me, or even considering I'm from Czechoslovakia, which wasn't part of the Soviet Union, but we were under the influence of communism, let's say. But you know, it was like reading something from a parallel universe, distant from myself, distant from me, but at the same time relatable, but not really. It was a strange read, this one, in this sense, and this drinking thing was one piece of puzzle in this mosaic, I'd say. What do you think about that?
I I feel that a lot. That was it's all against this backdrop of kind of how should I say this? It is like he's hanging out with a lot of lowlifes and
Hmm.
creatives who are generally very very suppressed or repressed at least during this period. Um, and so the
Unless
alcoholism
you wrote
itself,
about the right stuff, of course.
exactly, unless
Unless
you
you
have
wrote
the
about the
right things.
proletariat. Yeah.
Exactly. Or you wrote everything about Lenin, like that. I can't
Oh
remember the
yes,
name of that one
like that
author.
one guy.
Yeah, he just wrote like 18 books on Lenin, got super rich. Oh, that's good. But the book takes place with like this underground sort of, but it's not like a like kind of as an American we think of like underground rebellious movements where there's always some kind of like high-minded ideal, freedom or something that you're looking for. These people were just surviving, right? Everybody understood like the regime and all of these values and principles that they are being put up on pedestals and everything. They're like, oh well, this isn't this isn't for me. This isn't for anybody, really. We never come across in these stories a single person who's like, who's all about communism and the
No.
proletariat and and all these high-minded ideals. It's all people who are finding ways to enrich themselves or just get their next drink while in this system. So it's I think you're probably spot on that it seems like it's tied into the overall philosophies and the response that the people have to the regime that they're living under more than anything else. Without the regime actually being characterized much at all, it's
Mhm.
a real down to earth look at just like the results. Hmm.
Yeah, it's like this. The regime isn't present exactly in this book. It all of those things, all of those chapters, all of the acts are sort of at this backdrop of this black cloud called communism, and you're witnessing the mayhem, you could say, that it had on the human soul. You know, this sort of
Hmm.
crushing, crushing pressure under which you had to bear your weight. And it was interesting to see how those people uh, bore in that weight. You know,
Hmm.
Either through coping mechanisms such as drinking or your dissociation from whatever was going on. There was this, to me, the strangest story was with this guy that served with him in the prison colony, and the guy who whacked Sergei over his head with
With the belt.
with his,
Yeah.
yeah, so that was one of the craziest stories to me,
Hmm.
because he got drunk, hurt Sergei, and then he was trying to get out of trouble with the help of Sergei, and Sergei helped him quite, without hesitation, I'd say, and then he didn't show any thankfulness for that. So that was one of the craziest stories to me. But yeah, it was just it's. And I think this. Why am I saying this? I think this particular story is a great witness to what that mentality brought down on you, or what the or how your mentality changed under that regime. I think.
Hmm. Definitely. Yeah, and I think this probably came up too in the first book that we reviewed, the Year of the Frog. Um
Yeah.
that one was very similar, was satellite state to to Russia during the time in Slovakia, but it was the same. It's it just contrasts in my mind so differently than how people um have general like in America or the West in general probably think of when they are against the government, right? When they have different
hmm
ideals or something
Yep.
like that, right? There can be this fire, this passion. They're organizing marches. They know what they want to get done. They're all about it. They're like, we're gonna change. We're gonna change the system. We're gonna do all of this, and there can be like some fire and passion. But these stories are completely devoid of an actor like that, right? They are it's not a democracy. There's no like the only kind of regime change that's probably ever been experienced by some people in their lives has been very violent revolution um, by this point, and it's just this indifference and like apathy towards like, oh yes, it's the system. We all
Yeah.
do what we got to do, and there doesn't really seem to be a lot of like there's a lot of boisterous shouting about communism and how great everything they're doing is they're building communism, but it's presented in the story like nobody really believes this per se. So
Yeah.
it's gosh,
I
yeah, so
think it.
interesting.
I think indifference is the key term there. Indifference. It's like, I think you enter a point, or the human psyche under that sort of regime enters a point, or enters a crossroad, or you meet yourself at the crossroad, and you have two roads. You either participate fully in the regime, and you decide that you will go to the if you wanted to have a career during communism, you had to undergo a formal education, which was called the theory of Marxism-Leninism, and you had to undergo this. It was a course, essentially a course of lectures that spanned across like a year or something. And you had to undergo this, and when you had this done, you could pursue a career in, in whatever you wanted to pursue your career in. And so you could do this. You could be, you could enter the party. You could, uh, be accepted into this course, and choose a life of formality within the confines of the regime, or you could choose a path of not exactly resistance, but of indifference. And I think that's what we witnessed in his stories a lot. This sort of indifference towards the regime. He wasn't particularly keen about the regime, apparently, but there was this sort of indifference. Yeah, I think that's really the key word there. There was a joke during communism that um, communism is not going to be here forever, but we don't know whether it's going to collapse in 200 or 500 years. That used to be a joke because nobody thought communism would collapse in 1989 when it did.
Hmm.
But so all you could do was either corrupt your own soul, let's say, and then uh, try to entangle yourself with the regime, and say yes to the right things and say no to the wrong things, and then you could have a good life. And if you didn't want to do that, the regime let you live, but you weren't having much of a life, you know.
Hmm. Definitely. Yeah, it's there's a like there particularly with like some of the creatives from like the newspaper or like that one guy who's trying to film that independent movie where Sergei was playing a czar. Like he's got these very high-minded ideals, and he's trying to film it in secret kind of. He would like present it in hotels or try to get the Western journalists to look at it so that it could get distributed into the West or something like that. Um
Yeah.
and it's but even in that, like there's no high-minded of ideals of like, ah yes, we're going to replace communism or something like this, right? Because in
Yeah.
a system like this where there's such top-down control, it's not feasible to do something like that, right? If you're trying to lead like a democratic revolution or something like that in most Western countries, right? You're like, okay, I get enough people behind me, we vote in a coordinated fashion. If it, like there's a path to completely changing this system in my lifetime, as unlikely as it is, right?
Yep.
But there's zero chance, right? The system is set to kill every little chance where it seeds at its roots before anything can happen. And so all the like the struggles of being a creative in particular, where
Hmm.
you can't pursue what you really want to, right? You can't write about what you really want to write about. You got to write about all this propaganda. You need to find these people and write the stories in a very specific fashion. Um, like in particular for creatives, it just seems absolutely um, just what would be the word? Just hopeless. Um, like you you don't even really have a chance of going out in a blaze of glory, right? It's like, oh,
Yep.
if you write something and it gets distributed in the West, maybe you'll just get taken out, maybe you'll get exiled or something. But
Yep.
there's no grandeur to a lot of those of those sorts of things.
Yeah, in connection to this, we are recording this podcast just a few days after one of the leading opposition figures in Russia was
Hmm.
killed or died in a prison colony north of the polar circle in Russia, called Alexei Navalny.
Hmm.
And yeah, nobody really knows how he died, but it's certain that he died because of the conditions he was living in under his imprisonment. And you know, when you're mentioning these sort of martyrs, or like this martyrdom of uh, or possible martyrdom of these opposition figures, um, I think the Russian regime managed to create a true martyr now in Alexei Navalny.
Mm.
Let's put his politics aside for now because he was no saint too. But I think they managed to add him to the list of these great of people who will be great martyrs uh, for the future Russian nation. So yeah, just in connection to that. So I guess that's what makes the regime of Vladimir Putin different from the regime of communism, because communists, they were suppressing you, but they weren't exactly trying to kill you unless you were super annoying. They'd rather push you out. If you were super annoying, they'd rather push you out so you could go on and live in the West and write whatever you want, and you wouldn't bother them anymore. But the Putin's regime is different in the sense that it tries to eliminate its critics and tries to eliminate its its opposition instead of mere suppression. Elimination is the word of the day.
Mm.
So in some sense, this regime uh, is cruel, far more cruel than the communist regime, you could say. So yeah, that's in connection to what you just mentioned. Yeah.
Definitely. Sounds good. Yeah. So
Mm.
let's pivot here. I do have one note on this is more on the structure of the writing than on the
Hmm.
content necessarily. And I pulled this up from his Wikipedia page, and it makes total sense looking back in hindsight here because there was something about his writing. It was generally very simple sentences and words, and obviously it's translated
Hmm.
to a certain
Hmm.
extent, but it
Fairly short. Yep.
exactly. Yep. Short sentences, simple words, and there's a lot
Yep.
of stuff kind of conveyed through like tertiary thoughts or context cues more than directly
Hmm.
in the writing. And I
Yep.
found in, let's see if I can find the line here exactly. Where did I? Ah, here we go. He had a rule that, as he said, this is from his Wikipedia page under literary style. It says it
Hmm.
limited the prosaic just like rhyme limits the poet. So he wanted to build the sentences so that there were no two words that started with the same letter. So his sentences ended up being very short and
Oh.
simple. No, not many clauses on it, right? Like when I write, I'm doing full stream of consciousness. It's hard for me to find a
Yep.
place to put a period in sometimes. But his are very short, very simple, and it's a really cool style that I think I'm gonna have to kind of try out
Hmm.
writing like that. Um, and it really matches, particularly for this story. I haven't read other stuff by him, obviously, but
Hmm.
it really fits the stories that he tells very well. It's short, it's
Hmm.
simple, it's plain, it's to the point. You know, it matches that he doesn't have a lot of those introspective moments where he would ramble on or very this happened, this is what I did, this happened, this is what I did.
Yep.
It fits super well.
I agree. One of the rare moments when he sort of lets you peek in is when he talks about his wife,
Mm.
and he said that he always was one of the he was of a lonely kind, and I wrote out a quote of his here, and he said, "I prefer loneliness, but in the presence of someone." And that someone was his wife in his case. But I think that's such a nice about an author. You don't so he writes this book in the first person, and considering he writes that in first person, you don't know much about him, and all of a sudden he reveals something so deeply intimate to you through use of simple language. It just sort of strikes you, I think.
Hmm. Yeah, that story in particular, where he talks a lot about like how he met his wife and a lot of that
Yep.
going.
Hmm.
He mentions like, yeah, I always be hanging out at bars with people, but that's more because that's where I could get drinks. It's not like he would go out of his way to conversate
Yep.
with people. It would just kind of happen in the course of he does it. As soon as he sobered up, all of his social batteries gone immediately, and he'd go back to being super introverted. Um,
And mind you, Sergei Dovlatov is a big guy. He has a big beard, very tall. Strong built, and you know, he's this sort of very introverted, sort of timid person
Hmm.
inside.
Definitely. Yeah, there it's while we were talking about the story about where he talks about his wife, it was such an interesting like like cultural difference, relationship difference and everything. Like his
Yeah.
relationship to his wife is so so completely different than any relationship I've ever had. It's you know they meet, they talk about literature, right? So they're talking constantly about all this literature, and they it seems like they just kind of you know stayed together and talked about literature. He's like there's a point where he says the only thing that we had in common was our indifference. Uh,
Yes.
to just everything in general, neither of them voted very often, worried about
No.
this. And when they had their first kid, his daughter, he says that was like getting the marriage certificate. It was official,
No.
that finally they didn't just have shared indifference; they had something that they had to care for together. Uh,
It was a moment like, oh, so we're doing this.
exactly, like he managed to slow walk for 10 years into this relationship with his wife because they were both just simply they're like, it's good.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm
and
stuck with this one. So yeah.
yes, and there's one part towards the end of that story where he's going through a photo album of his wife's that he finds that he stumbles
Yeah.
across by accident. There's pictures of her growing up and all the different things that shaped her, um, made her who she was. And on the last page, there's a little picture of him there, not bigger than a postage stamp, like his ID picture. And he like
Yes.
stops. He's like, "This is what love is."
Yeah.
Like he got this far without ever considering that he and his wife could like love each other or something like that. And then in like his fashion, he just like grabs his coat and leaves, and that's the last you ever hear of that particular train of thought. But that story in particular had a lot like the closest you could get to introspection while still being Sergei Dovlatov. So
Yep. I wrote out this very part too for myself, and I think what it points to is this sort of death of individual emotion
mm,
that sort of occurs to you, maybe under communism or something. I don't know. I don't want to romanticize it, but it feels like they were so dull uh, towards towards their own emotion. They just completely sort of pushed it out, pushed it back, and it was only at this moment when he was saying goodbye to her, essentially, viewing, sifting through this album, and he saw himself there. It was perhaps the one of the the only times that he realized she loved him. So I think I think, and now maybe I'm wrong about this, but it could be that the system pushes you into such indifference or like numbness that it results into a death of individual emotion or something like that.
mm-hmm. Definitely. It's when you're really as a group or any sort of ideology pushing um that like this particular way of living or philosophy is the end all be all, right? If you're being fulfilled as a person, it should come because of this, right? You see this in a lot of like
Hmm.
like Christian sects as well, or very it's a very religious sort of
Hmm.
thought that the fulfillment that you get in your life, there's nothing greater than the fulfillment you'll get of being, part of this group or doing this particular thing. And so it corollaries onto all these, even if it's not explicitly stated, although it often is, that if you're getting fulfillment or, emotional, uh, some emotional connection or any of this unrelated to the ideal that you should be pursuing, um, that's bad, right? And so
Hmm.
it can be kind of pushed pushed top down, sort of in any group in general. This sort of like suppression of, oh, I'm not going to worry about how I'm feeling or something, right? Because I should be worried about something greater, and that makes sense that that would still persist even if you've just kind of become indifferent and dulled by it. That it wouldn't necessarily pop into your mind to think that you could get like your emotions matter, I suppose. So,
Hmm.
mhm.
Yeah. something like that. Yeah, that's it's an interesting view. I think that um, one of the interesting things that popped into my head now is that perhaps one of the reasons why communism failed in Soviet Union or in Russia is that people weren't really um, it wasn't theirs. They didn't really take it as theirs. It was just sort of over there, above their heads, and it was the system, and
Mm-hmm.
everybody sort of accepted the game and went on, but they didn't really accept it deeply. So the current Russian regime, it went back to what the Tsarist Russia was about. It was the nation, orthodoxy, and autocracy. Autocracy, orthodoxy, nation. And you can clearly see that in how the Russian regime currently behaves. And communism didn't have two of those essentially. It didn't have the nation because uh, the idea was that we are the Soviet people. We are connected with the idea of communism. Nations are a remnant of the past that divides us unnecessarily, and we are part of a one big whole, one holistic entity. And
Mm-hmm.
so that wasn't there, and orthodoxy obviously wasn't there either because um, orthodoxy as a religion was formally banned by communism. Under communism, there was no religion.
Mm-hmm.
Stalin was your god, or
Yep.
or whoever was at the particular top of the pyramid at that point. But I think perhaps this is one of the reasons why communism in large collapsed in Russia or in Soviet Union, and they reverted back to what they were used to for hundreds of years, which was the sort of czarist autocracy, orthodoxy, and nation.
Yeah, that's a good point. And in general, in authoritarian countries and systems, there would be a disconnect between what the people feel or what the people want and what's happening at the top, right? That's the
Hmm.
entire point, right? You have the people up running the country, and they're trying to push stuff top down, um, but there's no
Hmm.
way to really push back up, right? So if the people stop relating to the ideals
Hmm.
being pushed down, or they have some
Hmm.
different ideals that kind of are in their collective zeitgeist, there's no
Hmm.
feedback mechanism for that to go back up, and so that kind of feels like probably like a big portion of how, at least, this like indifference that Dovlatov exemplifies here happened,
Hmm.
right? It's like it's not something that there's no way you can do anything to influence the ideals, and you're not relating to what's there right now. So the only option is indifference. Interesting. Yeah, that's a good point, and that would be true even like in general, just for authoritarian
Hmm.
systems. Interesting.
That's
Hmm.
that's why democracy is superior to authoritarianism, or one of the reasons, or why it's more stable. In fact, over
Mm-hmm.
long stretches of time,
Yep.
because authoritarian regimes are very stable in the short term, right? Because any sort of opposition gets pushed out or suppressed. But when it boils over, uh, it's usually a revolution, or it's a great change, some sort of it's a it's a tectonic change, you could say.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Also, so what happens to you under this sort of regime is, I think, similar to what happens in to a fleas in a jar. Have you heard about this story? What happens to fleas in a jar?
I don't think so.
So if you put fleas in a jar and you put a lid on it, the fleas will jump, in the jar, and they will learn that they bang their head on the jar, right? Because it's closed. It's an enclosed space. So they will bang their head on the jar, and they will learn over time that they can only jump so high not to bang their heads. If you put the lid, if you put the lid out, if you unscrew it, and you leave the fleas in the jars still, they will only jump to that same height still, as if the glass ceiling was still there. They won't jump out. Yeah, and I think there was an experiment done. I don't know by whom, but it's an interesting experiment, and I think that's part of the behavior that occurs even in democracy or even in systems that are very rigid. You know, once you bang your head enough on the glass ceiling, you sort of get sick of it, and you stop doing it. Or it's the same with how they train elephants. You know, they tie an elephant when they're still infants or small. They tie them to a pole to train them. They can leave a certain spot, and as they train them like this, they remove the pole at some point, and they leave their rope around their foot. But the elephants won't move past the circle. They can usually stride along. So I think it's the same thing. You know, even though so you live in the illusion of the glass ceiling, even if in the absence of it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, once the system sort of puts you in a box and you learn the parameters of the box, you tend not to try to exit the box after some time, even if the box is open at some point.
Mm-hmm. Definitely, I like it. Yeah, that's interesting. But he kind of part of this when I was reading the book and that story. That's a perfect. That's kind of a perfect encapsulation of the idea. It's like uh, they were indifferent because they couldn't really imagine a path to something else or
Mm-hmm.
different influences. And it's like, how do you like? Are there any like invisible walls that aren't there that you aren't seeing in your life? I was trying to think about that one. I haven't thought about it too much, so I don't know if I have any great thoughts on it. But there's definitely a lot of you know uh, cultural programming, societal programming, or
Mm-hmm.
various pieces that you just kind of collect as you age. Um, that are probably similar to that, right? We don't live in authoritarian countries where there's kind of a big something to pin a lot of these issues with, um,
Mm-hmm.
just in one sweep. But there's definitely a lot of those um, that perhaps I'm not seeing that are I could jump out of this jar and I just haven't thought to.
Yep. Um, so I wrote out some quotes here,
Ooh,
and
yeah.
let's see. There was this one quote pertaining to what we just talked about. Uh, Sergei says at one point, a member of Russian intelligentsia who wasn't imprisoned isn't worth a dime.
Yeah,
So,
it really did. It really did. Like he'd be talking about people, and he mentioned, "Oh yeah, they went to prison here for a little while and
right?
got on to this."
It's so nonchalant. It's like,
Hmm.
oh, he went, naturally he was in prison too.
Yeah, it's like, oh, everybody goes to prison a little,
Yeah, right. It's so crazy. It's so arbitrary, and it's so funny how these people just bear that, how they accept it. They just sort of go along with it. It's crazy.
Hmm.
You know,
Oh, so
it's like
good.
everybody was in prison at some point. A member of Russian intelligentsia who wasn't imprisoned, not worth a dime.
Must be a spy. No.
Must be a spy. It's
Oh, it was
Christ.
great. The I wrote down, this isn't the actual quote from it, but I think I wrote this one after I think it was the story with his wife because she was leaving for
Yeah,
she was
Israel.
leaving for America first, but it was and perhaps you know some of this historical context. It
I
would
think
have
it was
been
Israel.
yeah, it was when Israel was constituted and the
Yep,
great emigration kind of. And there must have been
yep,
some
yep,
system in Russia where basically if you're a Jew, you can leave. And he's talking about
yep.
all these people. He's like, yeah, everybody was leaving. First, the real Jews left, and then everybody who could possibly be conceived as Jews left. By the end, I knew Orthodox pastors who were leaving who were Jewish. As I wrote down, I'm like, in this book, there are no honorable people. There's no true patriots or believers. There aren't even real Jews. Like everybody is just just making it work.
Yeah, just making it work. It's yeah, the Israel example was a great one. Yeah, it was, and it's quite shocking to me that these people just bear it. You would ask yourself, why haven't they just left? Why not leave this sort of country or system? But I think what plays a role there is two things. One thing is tribalism. You want to stick with your tribe. Stick it out even if it sucks. So that's one thing, and the other is that it seems like it's in the Russian nature, this sort of thing. Like they're willing to eat dirt for a year if they have to, if it brings some sort of pride.
Hmm.
You
Definitely.
know?
Yeah, and that can become like part of your pride, right? I mean, growing up in the middle
Yeah.
in the middle of the Midwest, right, in a small town, this is this is the play, all right? You're going to your local bar, you're drinking yourself silly every night. Maybe you're,
Yeah.
using some other
Yeah.
substances to get through it. There's nothing to do in your town. There's nothing to do for four towns around. You're only friends with a lot of these people because they're close, right? There's like
The
it's
drinking. Yeah.
it's pretty grim sometimes. I'll say it's not that bad. I'm exaggerating a bit, but
Yeah.
like
Yeah. Yeah.
it's pretty grim. But you internalize that, and you're like, well, this is the real life. All right.
Yeah.
There's it's a really good song. Debbie and I listen to it and we love it. It's actually called Real Life. It's guys talking about
Hmm.
this is real life in the real world. We ain't talking to no models. We got real girls, right? We go real
Hmm.
low, we get
Hmm.
real high, but it's all good, baby, because it's all right. And it's
Hmm.
like it's so ingrained. I remember talking to Debbie when I was first like getting promoted at my job and stuff. I'm like, Debbie, I'm making more money than my parents ever made at this point, and I'm kind of worried that our kids will grow up spoiled or something like this. And I'd be thinking through ways to like artificially like lower our standard of living. And I was like, we need some conflict here, all right? Or I don't know if I'll respect them. I don't know if I'll respect myself if because you're just so attached to things needing to be difficult.
Yeah. Holy cow. I mean, but it is quite admirable if it becomes a part of your identity, your ability to bear this sort of, grim conditions.
Hmm.
That is sort of admirable. That's why it
Yeah.
becomes a part of your identity because it is hard, and if you can overcome that, um,
Yeah.
it brings a sort of a virtue to yourself.
Exactly. It's the
So
same it's kind of the same treadmill as the they call it like the victimhood in Olympics, right? You want to be a
yep.
victim. You need people to oppress you because
Yeah.
in a backwards way, that's that's how you put
Yep.
yourself above others is you're more of a victim. So
That's why. That's why there was this a couple months ago. There was this documentary that came out about David Beckham
mm-hmm.
and his wife Victoria Beckham, who's a supermodel essentially, and all of that. She was talking to the documentarist, and she said, I'm from a very working class background, very working class. And David Beckham, he sort of peeks in the door and he says, "What car did your
Oh,
dad drive?" Did you see that?
Mercedes, yeah.
It was a Rolls
Oh,
Royce.
Rolls Royce, even worse.
What car did your dad drive? Oh, well, he drove several cars. No, no, no. What car did your dad drive when you were in high school? Oh, this and that. No, no, no. What car did your dad drive? He drove a Rolls Royce. Thank you.
Yeah, it's like
So,
it's
so that's how working class
yeah, right.
Victoria
Everybody
was.
needs to be working class if they make it, right? They need to play up their humble origins. You'll never meet like somebody getting interviewed who was like, yeah, actually, I this was my dad's business. I'm just keeping it going. A lot of the growth happened during him. I like to keep it afloat. My family lives comfortably. No, 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 no. You need that growth story. It's
But
something.
but yeah, but like, in my view, I think perhaps telling the truth is the more virtuous thing than like trying to
Hmm.
appear. then it's like more real when somebody says that. I would consider it more real, I'd say,
Hmm.
when you just sort of say that, like you said, I'm just keeping up my family's business or something. There's nothing wrong with that, it's normal, but the need to portray yourself as a, and I think it's, and I would say this is more prevalent in the United States, and the reason why is I think it's the American dream, because that's the pinnacle of virtue in American culture. The American
Hmm.
dream, from nothing to something, from zero to hero.
Yep.
That it's the pinnacle of virtue in American culture. So I think that's why many people are reverting back to it. In Europe, it's not so prevalent. I'd say Europeans, or at least some people, and I definitely met people like that, are far more, if they have an aristocratic origin, let's say, or they come from a long lineage of aristocracy, they will be proud of that. They will show you that they're from a family like that, you know. And there are family in diplomacy like that. There are families in different kinds of public domains like that. Some of them I've met, and they will show you quite clearly that they are from a different caste,
Mm.
in
Cast. Yeah.
caste, yeah, that they are from a different caste. So
Hmm.
they will show you this, which is quite different, quite
Hmm.
different to what you would, even the richest of the rich, even generational wealth type of people in America will try to downplay that,
Hmm.
and will try. So that's an interesting, I think, cultural difference there.
Yeah, yeah, it's and from a certain point, it's reversed from like old European traditions. This is like, uh, I'm
Hmm.
still working my way through a lot of Mark Twain stuff. This was kind of
Hmm.
his big like evolution was all the great writers were English, right? All the great writers were English
Hmm.
or French or something like this, and his style is very very down to earth, very like making fun of that style of things.
Hmm.
He's writing
Hmm.
comics where he's making fun of a well dressed guy with connections in Europe and places like this, and
Yeah.
there's a lot of just the reverse. And over time, it gets to the point where it's like you need to become a liar to tell yourself that this is your story, or you need to be okay that this isn't your story, right? Um,
Hmm.
because it's, I mean, just a
Hmm.
point of fact,
Hmm.
American hegemony being the most well-off country in the world for 80 years is going to get to the point where everybody's not starting from zero,
Yep.
especially
Yep.
most of your upper
Yep.
class. So
Yep.
thankfully, really rich guys can get away with this by marrying someone of low status.
Hmm.
Then they
Hmm.
can,
Hmm.
glom onto that. Their children can say, "Ah, yes, my mother was very poor." But-
Thankfully, there's that. You know, thank God for this amelioration of inequality.
exactly. And I actually, this probably gonna be my last thought before before we should probably kill this tangent. But
Yeah. Yeah.
it's been flipped so much, and right, we want to start from zero and work our way up. That it's not worked into many systems, but socially, it's better to have come from nothing, right? And even if you're,
Hmm.
say, you're better at something, I'll take the example like these, like Steph Curry in the NBA, right? He's probably one
Hmm.
of the greatest basketball players alive, but you'll find interviews with other NBA players, just giving him shit and saying, well, his dad was in the NBA, so he was raised, rich and successful. He didn't come from the streets and do this.
Hmm.
And it gets to a point where there's like such a bias against the people who in your society have probably grown up with the most resources and
Hmm.
well-adjusted methods and not stressed out parents, that it's a little too reversed almost. But I'm sure there's a happy medium. But
Hmm. All right. Yeah. It's a good way of ending this tangent, I suppose.
All right, let's see. Do I have any other big notes about this book here? The let's see. That was the officers. Well, there were a lot of names. Thankfully, there was a. I only noticed it when I got about halfway through the book that there was a glossary in the back of
Oh,
when he
you had
references
one?
when he
Okay.
references different Russian authors
Oh,
or
authors?
actors or something like that.
Yeah. Hmm.
There'd be a little asterisk, and I was like, oh. And about halfway through, I finally realized it was there, so I had to go back and read through some of those. But he did have a lot of like cultural references to like
You
the
did.
Soviet Union at this time, which I feel like it would be, obviously I don't get a lot of these inside jokes without a lot more research, but it kind of surprised me because when I think of things written, 50 years ago or whenever this could have been, I don't usually think of a lot of inside jokes per se, like time, like from a time and a region so different. It just never really occurred to me that there would be that this could be so packed with them. He does a ton of references like that, and I
Hmm.
thought that was really cool to read.
Hmm. Yeah, that's. I think I thought about the same thing, and I think that it points to two things. Well, number one, the Russian culture or the Soviet culture, you could say back in the day, um, it's really quite rich with intellectuals and people who are producing, uh, text or literature and art and all of that. You, and it's really interesting to see, different nations have a different sort of have a different thickness of that cultural layer. Some
Hmm.
nations have a really thick one, and then some not so much. And it seems, and I think this points to the fact that Russia really does have or the Soviet Union really did have a really thick portion of those people who could be considered intellectuals. Most of them were raised in Leningrad, nowadays St. Petersburg or Moscow,
Mm-hmm.
but those are huge cities which are um, which are enough to sustain uh, uh, a layer of intelligentsia fat
Hmm.
like that. So I think that's thing number one. And what's number? And I forgot number two. But in this connection, I think he. Oh, what was it? Uh, it's a different topic. I would like to start then. So if you have something to say about this, go ahead.
Oh, gotcha. I don't
Hmm.
think so in particular. The only thing I might add is I
Okay.
think like how insulated the Soviet
Mm-hmm.
Union and Russia for a lot of its history has been. And that just
Mm-hmm.
its own massive country and a lot of semi-isolationist tendencies, I'll say, at least for like the
Hmm.
broader West or Asia in general. Um,
Hmm.
I think this kind of helps that sort of thing. Like they can reference a lot of authors in these former intelligentsia, even if they're from previous regimes or
Yeah.
histories that maybe at the moment are out of style per se. Like there's a point where there's a painting of was it Dostoevsky, maybe, or another
Yep.
one that his wife points out in his house when they meet, and
Yep.
just that thick
She thought
history.
it was Solzhenitsyn, and it was Dostoevsky.
Oh, yep, that's what it was. So I think just being insular for such a long time and kind of
Yeah.
you're getting a lot of local, uh, you know, regional-ish at least
Hmm.
culture from there, not much from the broader world in general. So I think that probably
Hmm.
helps. Yeah, but yeah, go
Yeah,
ahead.
that's right. That's right. Um, by the way, uh, Solzhenitsyn is really one of the greats. Like I've read one book from him. I didn't read the big one that he wrote. His biggest work is the Gulag Archipelago,
Oh, yep.
which, yeah, that's his biggest work. But I read it's called Lenin in Zurich in Switzerland, and it's the story about Lenin and about his stay in Switzerland up to his journey to Russia to do the revolution. The story ends with him sitting on a train, which hauled him into Russia. It's a great book, but it's a very difficult. It's quite a difficult read. He writes very long sentences and
Hmm.
difficult ideas shuffled, but he's really one of the great writers. Honestly, one of perhaps one of the greatest writers ever. Anyways, I wanted to say, I don't know if you've noticed this, but across this book, there are hints of great dry humor,
Oh yeah.
and it's wonderful. It's wonderful. He says one time, so he goes to a hotel with his brother, his older brother, and there are these three acquaintances of his older brother, which happen to be all women, and they get drunk together, and his older brother is more successful in drawing their attention than Sergei is, and he says, "Out of sheer despair, I started reading yesterday's news." I think that was quite funny. You imagine the situation where these drunk three drunk women are sort of all over his brother, and
Mhm.
he just sort of shrugs it off with opening up a
Yeah.
pair of newspapers, a pair of yesterday's newspapers out of sheer despair.
Oh, it's
I
it's
think
it's
that's wonderful.
wonderful. Yeah, that's one thing that did, there's so much like culture shock and differences in this book, but some of those like dry humor, like even some
Mhm.
situational comedy pieces to it that come up, like for example, he meets his wife, he takes her out on a date. He's like, "We're going to go to this place because I know lots of famous people come through here and I know a few personally, right? They can talk me, they can gas me up a little bit in front of this lady here." And he goes and he waits. Nobody famous, right? He's running out of money in his wallet. Nobody's there. Finally, some like B-list semi-celebrity, who had some good papers, pokes his head through the door and comes walking through. He's like, and he knows he's an acquaintance, so he raises his glass to him. And as he walks by, the guy just says, "I read your piece in this magazine last month. It was crap." And walks right
Right.
past. The exact opposite of what he's
That
been
was
waiting
perfect.
here for with this lady.
It was perfect.
So good. It was wonderful.
And
Different styles of humor, but it was there's a lot, still in common, like the ridiculous situations he gets into a lot of the times and that dry humor. It's excellent. Mhm.
it's this sort of absurdist humor which I really like for some reason. It's sort of you take the situation which is absolutely absurd and you turn it on its head with your ability to put it humorously. It's just great. And he says at one point, if humiliation, then total humiliation it is. I think
Mhm.
that's it's the there's a saying that if you're choosing between two paths, choose the one which will result in the greater adventure.
Mhm.
And I think that's what he portrayed in one of those
Oh,
stories as well, when he said, if humiliation, then total humiliation it is. He takes it to the logical end, and that's what I appreciate.
definitely. It's wonderful. Like the portrayal. It's especially compared with like propaganda at the time from either side, right? Soviet propaganda, big
Yeah.
high-minded ideals of communism and the solitary worker. And then, if like America was putting out propaganda about them, it was a lot of similar vibes of, a very like evil empire sort of, autocracy regime. Everybody's walking in straight lines. Uh, and the best parts of these books is when it's just you realize quickly the way he portrays this that these are completely normal people put in like the trappings of these
Mhm.
ideals or philosophy or whatever. Like when he was doing a little bit of time as a stonecutter for this statue, and there's the great
Mhm.
unveiling, and he's at the dinner down the table from the mayor of the town. He takes his shoes off and he reaches over and he steals his shoes with his feet and stuffs them in a big bag that he had. And the mayor figures this out. And he's like, "Oh well, it would just be silly of me if I had to walk somewhere without my shoes." So he's like, "Oh, I'm feeling kind of sick," and goes and lays down on a couch. And immediately his guards are like, "Quick, start the ceremony, get out of here. We need to check everybody's IDs. This could be an assassination."
Yeah.
It's like the juxtaposition of what should be this very serious, everything has a
Yep.
procedure, everything has a process, but the people are still the same here, right? It's not like they turned into machines just because you want them to. It's really good when he's doing stuff like that throughout the book. Oh,
Oh my God, that one that was probably the funniest story when they were he was working as the stonecutter for the statue, and you know the general attitude in that story is I think what portrays the Soviet Union or the way people approached work in general during that time. You know, you just sort of like do what's necessary. You know, you do the bare minimum, you know, to get paid, and then you just sort of they were quiet quitting before it was cool.
they're way ahead of you, Gen Z. All
They
right.
were way ahead of me.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
excellent. All right, let me check
Hmm.
my list here to check for my notes here. I've got. I think I've covered. Oh, I did write this down. It was uh utterly unheroic tales in a country obsessed with nationalistic heroism. It's so good. The
He's a sort of
juxtaposition is wonderful.
yeah. He is sort of an anti-hero when you think about it.
Hmm.
You know, he's not this, you know, great. He was the son of a theater director, right?
Hmm.
And not a very good one. So, but so he didn't have the money a good theater director would have, but he also didn't have the prestige of the proletariat. So he was stuck in the middle. Sort of, you know, he drew the worst card essentially. The shortest end of the stick, and that's very funny. I think that's a very funny juxtaposition as well. It's you know, you are because if you were of aristocratic origin or if your family were members of the intelligentsia in some way, you were usually during communism you were labeled a bourgeois nationalist,
Hmm.
and there was a real clause that you could be punished for. You know, you could go into prison for being a bourgeois nationalist because that was against communism, right? We are all one people, one Soviet
Hmm.
people, so you can be a nationalist. And yeah, so he sort of he was drawing the shortest end of the stick here because he was a member of the intelligentsia, but not a good one. So he didn't have the money or influence that would assume him a good life. And at the same time, he wasn't the idealized member of the proletariat. You know, he wasn't I don't
Hmm.
know uh, 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 what what would you say a miner or something. You know, something
Yep.
stereotypically working class.
Hmm.
Uh, so he didn't have the social capital of being a member of the proletariat, and he didn't have the money of the bourgeoisie. So it's a great and he was obviously very intelligent, you know. So it was it was interesting to see how an intelligent, creative person suffers under this sort of regime, but is able to overcome it through cynicism, but at the same time humor and sort of this absurdist attitudes towards life and all of that. And in connection to this, there's an interesting thing I've noticed, and perhaps you've noticed that too, that there was a strange sense of mutual interaction that was weirdly honest or weirdly frank among those people. You know, like the
Mm-hmm.
episode, you know, it was like those people were alienated in many ways, but at the same time, it's like this sort of the phenomenon of trauma bonding or something. You know, it's like if you're
Exactly.
undergoing this same crap, it bonds you with the other person. And I think this is something that's been happening there as well. You know, when this guy he whacks him over his head with he gets drunk and whacks him over his head with his belt buckle, and he you know he loses his consciousness, loses a lot of blood and all of that. He could have died there, and uh, and he just says, "Okay, I'll cover for you at the court."
Hmm.
So that's quite funny, you know. You wouldn't expect that,
Hmm.
but there's this
Yeah.
sort of camaraderie, you know.
Definitely. Yeah, there's a camaraderie, and it's less. how to say it. It's like well, we're all together in this. We all need to survive this, you know. The system will try its best to do stuff right. And we're not causing or making a scene or anything here, but we're all in this together. And if you could talk person to person, very frank in a very Russian way, uh, you can tell nobody's probably taking this seriously unless you're in a formal setting where you need to really play it up. Uh, and yeah, it's such an interesting one. It's definitely a lot of that
It's
sort of
yeah,
that sort of trauma bonding, and everybody's sort of like, okay, yep, we got to deal with this. It was very
God
interesting.
damn, it's so interesting, like to witness on stories from a real life of someone, um, to witness what the regime was like. It's great. Yeah. Um, Also, there was this one time he was talking to his editor, right? And this points to, I think, the perhaps you could say the what hyper brutality or hyper sort of roughness of that society. He's talking to his editor, and the editor tells him, "Oh, you have this one respondent. You should go and interview." And he just gained his freedom. And Sergei asks, "What do you mean he's a free man? What do you mean he gained his freedom? Is he a thief or something?" And his editor says, "Oh, thief, come on. He's a rapist. He's a rapist." It's like rape, the worst possible crime
hmm
you could do. And,
Yeah,
it, and he,
it's really interesting when I read historical stuff like this, or even some of the Mark Twain stuff that I've been reading back through, and the crimes that are the worst have really shifted over time, right?
mm,
Nowadays, rape, genocide,
mm,
these things, these are unspeakable crimes. But back in the day, these were not like the problematic crimes, right? You're talking stuff like what's the word? Like blasphemy,
mhm.
being a thief. These were these
Hmm.
were like the worst things, like something as piddly as rape. Like,
As
oh,
rape.
God, please.
Right.
I
That was
mean, who
crazy.
hasn't done
Right? It,
May he
fucking
who has not raped throw the first throw the first stone. Woo, man.
Good. Yep.
Thankfully, nobody listens to this podcast, Tim, or we'd be getting clipped right
we,
out of here.
we flipped. Um, yep. So
Oh,
go
that was
life
really
jackets.
no life
So,
jackets, baby. Uh, that's
but
good.
that was really in a weird way. It was funny. It was
hmm
like, oh, a thief. Come on, he's a rapist.
Oh man, it was really a good read. I think I'll probably read it again sometime, and I'll make sure to be like
Yeah.
looking at the references in the back. But yeah, this is the kind of book that you can knock out in a couple of hours, probably. So
Yeah.
absolutely fantastic read. I suppose I'm gonna give a rating here, Tim. I'm gonna say that this is I'm gonna go with 7 out of 8 random Soviet items. I think that's what I give it.
Okay, let's see. I'm gonna give it I'm gonna give it 4 out of 5. 4 out of 5 belts.
Oh, I love like yeah, that was such a weird one because the belt that he got hit over the head with isn't like just a normal belt buckle. They like
No,
I
no, it
I
was
think it was like an emblem that was kind of hollow, but that was brass or bronze, and they'd flip it over on the backside and they'd fill it with tin. I
with
think that's
10,
what I
so it
picked
would
up on
be
the
heavy,
process.
when he
Exactly.
whacked someone with it,
Get that
and it
weight.
had the Soviet star on it. The
Mm-hmm.
5 star.
Yep, for cutting. Oh my goodness. Gosh.
Yeah, Jesus, and
Badass.
he whacked him over his head with. It was crazy. Great story. Yeah.
Oh, fantastic. All right. Well, we should probably wrap up here. I think we got let's see, how long is this even recording
About
going
an
to be?
hour.
Yeah, it'll be a while. Yeah, a little over an hour, so that'll be good length. But yeah. I'll any last words, Tim, before I stop the recording?
Let's see. So I'm going to end with this quote of his. He said, "All of my friends were burdened by the weight of genius," and I think that was a burden he carried unto his last breath.
Oh yes, I think that's part of the quote lines where he's saying, "Genius. I have many friends burdened by genius. I'm a genius. Everybody can be. I'd tell anybody that I'm a genius. But when people ask me if
But a
I'm a
writer,
writer, that's a lot different. That takes a little longer to answer." It's like, oh, that's good. That's good. Uh, all right, I will stop the recording here.